Good morning and welcome back. It's a warm morning here in the Philippines. They've been having a heat wave here in Southeast Asia. In this video, I want to cover cloning and templating of virtual machines in Proxmox. In addition, I want to talk about cloning of virtual machines, which is not a Proxmox only discussion. And this is more about preparing your clones and actually doing the cloning. This is somewhat new to me, cloning and templates in Proxmox, that is. I've been doing clones of various VMs in VirtualBox for years, almost as long as I've been using VirtualBox. I mean, it was generally standard practice to make a base image and then clone it and play with it. And if you broke it, toss the clone, make a new clone. Like a lot of things in Proxmox, this should be intuitive. However, I got some mixed results initially. Probably a result of my experience with VirtualBox, as there are some distinct differences in how the cloning works between that and Proxmox. So as usual, a bit of study was required. One thing that came up with Proxmox more than often is preparing the VM for cloning or templating. This is something I really never saw a lot on any of the tutorials I reviewed on cloning on VirtualBox, but it comes up pretty much most of the time on Proxmox. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to the discussion at hand. After thinking a little about my opening remarks, I want to sort of mix up this presentation order a little bit. I feel like I should discuss the whys of cloning and templating before we actually talk about cloning and templating, not just the hows. I do want to mention I still use VirtualBox. It's on my laptop, and when I'm not here in my home lab, away from home, I find the need to create a clone, VirtualBox works great. I mean, it's more resource intensive than Proxmox, but it still works and does the job. It's fairly straightforward, so this is no knock against VirtualBox. It's just different use cases require different tools. One of the things I said in the introduction, my prologue, is when I was cloning with VirtualBox, never really worried about preparing a virtual machine for cloning, but this seems to be a much more important issue in Proxmox, so I had to take a little look into that as well. So for this video, I want to cover why I would clone a machine, and again, this is for me. You might have your own reasons, or your reasons might be the same as mine, don't know. I want to talk about the difference between a clone and a template. And I'm going to mention something in Proxmox called a cloud template. I also want to talk about things to do in preparation for cloning. I'll end this particular video with a discussion of how to create clones and templates for a VM, as well as the post-cloning procedures one should probably go through after you have a new working VM from a clone. Now, I want to take a minute to discuss the procedure I worked out for this video. This is not the end-all way of doing things, and believe me, you probably do things a different way than I do. But after, like I say, I did a lot of cloning with VirtualBox, and then after reading a lot of tutorials and doing some experimentation, and what you're seeing here is very much early cloning and templating in Proxmox, experimentation, if you will. Again, my process is first to build the perfect VM, and I mean perfect in a more esoteric sort of sense, in that call it my golden base VM for whatever operating system I'm working with. In this case, it's going to be Debian 12, but I will set it up a base install with as few packages and get it into a condition that I want to use it for a base for other experiments, other types of VMs. Then I'm going to clone my golden base, and I'm going to call that my golden clone. That's the procedure we'll be looking at as well. As far as making the base, we're going to go through that really, really quickly because I cover that in other videos. Actually, then we'll demonstrate turning your golden base into a golden clone. Then we'll make changes to the golden clone. I don't want to mess up my base VM. In case I mess up the clone, I can just delete it and start over. Once the clone is set up for templating, we'll create our golden template from our golden clone. And then from that golden template, we will create additional virtual machines that will serve other purposes, be built up in different directions, and so on. So that's basically my process here. So without any further ado, let's get to it. Okay, clones and template. A clone is an exact copy of a virtual machine. In our case, it's a software clone because we're just cloning the software. The hardware is sort of set up for all the machines the same. It includes the operating system and the applications, as well as all the settings. Why clone? Well, for myself, I create a golden base image of an OS, and I'm going to be building multiple different types of images from that with that OS. Then I can basically clone the base OS and then expand it to the purpose I want. I should note that even if you have a golden clone, it's eventually going to be out of date, even if you have a rolling release or a set release for your distribution. At some point it will be out of date. You'll need to make a new one. The other reason is to test new concepts on a clone, so I can actually clone a machine and try and implement something new and see what happens. And if it breaks beyond repair, you can just delete the clone and make a new one and try again. Now, a template's a little different than a clone. Templates make it easier and faster to create a VM. A template is made from a clone, and while it takes at least for me so far, about 20 to 30 seconds to clone a VM. A template usually clones in about 5 seconds. Since templates can't be edited, they protect the integrity of your golden image. And like I say, they're faster, and there is something called a cloud image that can be used to create a template. And a lot of major distributions have cloud images available online that are in the correct format to be used with Proxmox. You download those instead of actually creating a golden image from the install script. You download one of these pre-built ones, and that becomes your image. Issues I have with these are the same I had with containers. You never know exactly what's in them. You need to use one and investigate and go through it a couple times just to find out what's there. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using them. It's just you don't know what's in them initially until you've actually used one for a while. So for example, if you go to http cloud.debian.org images cloud, you'll find the cloud images that could be used for Debian. Well, last time I checked it was Debian 11. No one's made a Debian 12 cloud image yet, but I'm sure, well, not on the Debian side. I know there's a couple out there on other sites, but you can also find Ubuntu, and there's a turnkey site that has images that are more than base images. They're actually set up for a particular purpose, be it security, be it web server, be it whatever. And those are the same thing, they're a cloud image. In this tutorial, we're not going to be using the cloud image. All right, we're going to go ahead and build our Debian image. We're going to install a base image with just the base software on it. We're going to do this fairly quickly. I'll mention a few things along the way when we get to them. The network we're going to configure as DHCP. That's better for something you're going to clone. Even if it was set up for static, you would still have to go in and set it on your clone. So even if it's DHCP and you want static, you can still change it. It just will get its own IP address that way. We're giving it a host name and a domain, and these are things you may need to change, but we'll get to that. Our passwords. We're creating a root password, so it's not going to install sudo by default, which it would if you didn't create a root password. So we create a standard user. We put everything in one partition, and then we uncheck everything when we are actually doing the software update and the task select, except for standard system utilities. And that's it. We pretty much quickly set up our Debian base image. We're going to have to make some modifications to this image before we can use it, though. One thing to note here is the number we gave to our virtual machine that we're going to clone. I used 901 to separate it from the other ones. I've got sort of a pattern here with numbers. 100s are on the Olympus node, and the 200s are on the Tartarus node. The 900s are going to be what I use in this particular setup, just to keep them separate so you know what you're looking at. I also added a comment here and the date of creation. So we're going to jump over to the console. We're going to log in as root. We're going to take a quick look in the SSH directory. We need to know what's there for a little later. You'll see. Here's our machine ID and etc machine-id. This is something that a lot of tutorials tell you need to blank out so it'll change. In Debian, there's another version of this file in variable lib dbus machines, and it's the same number. So I've found over a few tests that you got to change both of them, or you're going to end up with the same machine ID. I'm doing a little research into why this is important, but one thing I found is that certain distributions using systemd for stuff use a machine ID instead of the MAC address, which could mess up your network. That's the only really example I found. If anybody knows any other examples, please let me know. And we look at our host name here, and our host file. We need to know these file locations because when we spin up a new clone, we're going to have to change some of these so they won't be the same as the old one. Again, this is mainly to avoid conflict on a network. We can also look at our network interfaces file, and we can see that we're set up for DHCP on our network interface. So those are the important things we need to look at and think about when we're creating a clone that they may need to change. Or excuse me, so since we want our clones to be able to access through SSH, and we want our non-root user to have sudo privileges, we need to install those files. We're going to have to do that through the Proxmox interface because we don't have a SSH server installed yet. So first thing we'll do is an update, and then we'll do an upgrade. And then we're going to use apt to install OpenSSH server and sudo. Once they're installed, we do a vi sudo to look at the sudo file, and we make sure that the group sudo is available and active, and it is. If you're familiar with Debian, a lot of the stuff you're probably not going to do because you already know what the results are going to be, but I'm just showing everything. Now if we look in our group file, we can see sudo's there. It's an etc group, but nothing's attached to it, so we'll do a user mod and add sudo to our non-root user. And therefore, after we reboot, we should be able to go in via OpenSSH, and our non-root user should be able to do some root operations. Also want to take a look at our IPA to see what our network address is, and we want to check our network address as well as our MAC address. Then we'll go ahead and power down our golden image. And we're ready to move on. Okay, now that we got our golden image the way it is, let's go ahead and make a clone out of it. There are two places you can figure out how to do this. there are two places you can do this. If you right click on the actual VM itself, you'll find both clone and convert to template. If you select your VM and then you come up here to the More button, you'll find the same two entries, clone and clone to template. We're going to go ahead and just make a clone. We're going to give it a new number. We'll give it 9002 or 902, and we'll give it a name. And then we'll hit clone, and we will wait for it to clone and configure itself, and it should take around 20 to 30 seconds, something like that. And there we have it. That was all there was to making a cloned image. Unfortunately, that's not all there is to it, but yeah, that was making the clone image. Now that we have a cloned image, let's go ahead and see about SSH again. I will be using PuTTY here. We'll go ahead. You'll notice when we connect to the machine, the host key does not match, so we've got a chance to accept the host key. This is like a fingerprint for the host. It should be the same one that's actually on our golden image. Anyway, once we're in, we got to use our non-root user and password because root login through SSH in this case is not allowed. Now if we take a look in our etc SSH directory, we can see all the files have been added as SSH host. These are the keys. When we make a template out of this, we're going to want to delete all these keys, but we're going to want to leave everything else in this folder. Interestingly, they won't auto-populate, but we'll get to that. Look in hosts and host name, and we can see we've still got the same host name and fully qualified domain name as we had in our golden machine. We'll probably leave those for now, and this is something you're going to really have to change in the end result virtual machine you're going to be using. You'll have to go in and change the host name. And of course, we've still got our machine ID. Okay, let's take a look at machine ID. As I've seen that mentioned a lot when I read tutorials or watch videos. There happens to be a man page for it. Let's make a little bigger text. What I'm interested in is this section right here where first boot semantics. So number one, if it does not exist, that should be for a new machine, but it does exist. 2, uninitialized, 3. Yes, I've tried all these scenarios. The one that seems to work best is scenario 2, where I change the content to uninitialized, and then it will get a new machine ID when the machine is run, when the virtual machine is run for the first time. I've heard people say that 3, just delete the actual machine ID from the file and save it, but I've had better luck using uninitialized, so that's what I'm going to do. So let's start our preparation by first getting rid of our machine IDs. If we try this as the normal user, permissions denied. Sudos may or may not work, but I think we really need to become root, so we'll use su to become root. And then we'll echo uninitialized single greater than key and accept machine IDs. This will overwrite the content of the file with uninitialized. If we had done a double greater than, it would have just appended. And as you can see, uninitialized. And then we want to do it to the second file in the Debian installation in variable lib dbus. And they should both be ready now. The next thing we really want to do is remove the SSH fingerprints, and we're going to have to deal with this on our final outcome machine, but we'll get to that. So we'll use sudo remove SSH host star or password. And that should clear out all the fingerprint keys we want to clear out, so when we do SSH again, we can have its own set of keys for this, whatever machines we create. But again, like I say, there's a second part to this we're going to see in a little bit. Once we're done with these changes, we're going to go ahead and want to power down. I mean, we don't have a specific user we need to remove because both users that we have are generic. So we'll go ahead and shut the machine down. Okay, now that we've got our clone shut down, let's go ahead and convert it into a template. This is pretty simple. It's a single menu option. And again, you can find it if you right click on the VM itself, or you go up to the more menu. But we're going to go ahead and hit convert to template, and then we'll say yes. Now at this point, our golden clone is going to be gone. Our golden image we made originally still there, but our golden clone is going to be changed into our golden template. And this should only take a few seconds. And you'll notice now that the icon's changed. We have a little, like a piece of paper behind the monitor icon. This shows it's a template now. And if you try and edit it, you'll find out you can't edit it. You can't even start it up. You can't really do anything with it other than clone it. So now that we have our template, let's go ahead and turn that into a virtual machine we'll actually use. We'll again right click on it, or we'll use the more menu, and we'll tell it to clone. We need to give it a new ID number. I'm going to come up with better names and ID numbers here at some point. We're going to call it 301 and Debian testing. Yeah, definitely going to have to think about names and IDs here. And you'll notice it takes about 5 seconds to actually create this, as opposed to the 20 to 30 seconds with the going from a VM to cloning a new VM. And that's it. We've actually created our VM. So now that we've created a new VM, let's go ahead and start it up, and we're going to have to do some work on it to make it actually ready for work. So we'll log in through Proxmox's root, because I can guarantee you we will not be able to do it via PuTTY and SSH. In fact, let's demonstrate that right now. See, connection refused. So let's log in through Proxmox, and you'll see we had no new keys created. And this may be a Debian thing. I'm going to play around with Arch a little later and see if it does the same thing. But to get our SSH keys back, or not get them back, but get a new set in Debian, we're going to use a low-level dpackage reconfigure of OpenSSH server. And now we have SSH keys. So now if we try and log in, it sees these are new SSH fingerprint keys, because you get this message again saying it's never logged in here before. So that's good. That's what we wanted. We wanted a different set of SSH keys on this clone, on this virtual machine. So we can go ahead and log in as RT and proceed to check our network settings. You can also see we've got a new MAC address, but we're still using the IP address. I'm not quite sure why this is, but if you start up the original machine we built that uses this IP address first, then this one will get a new lease and a new IP address. Not sure quite the details there. I'm going to have to look into it some more. Okay. Next step, let's check our machine ID. We've done this before, and we can see we actually have a new machine ID in etc machine ID. However, and I'm not sure why this is, and I'll have to look into this. I think it has something to do with the install, but the variable lib dbus machine ID did not change. is still uninitialized, so we'll simply just copy over the one from Etsy into the variable libdbus. And now we have them both changed. Okay, the next thing we want to look at doing is changing our host name. And, well, if needed, you can change your domain name. So let's go ahead and edit our host name file, and we're just going to call this D12, make it simple. And then you also need to edit the hosts file and make the same changes here. We're going to use the same domain name, so once these changes are made, once you reboot, we should have a new host or a host name. Speaking of reboot, let's go ahead and do that now. And we'll change our node here since that got copied over with the clone. And our image should be ready to go. Use as normal. Should not have any interference from any other images. And that's what we want. So we're done at this point. All right, that's our video for the day. It's been an interesting row here. Interesting row to hoe. Okay. Anyway, this was my first time through it, so things were a little rough, and I'm sure there are probably better ways to do things than what I'm doing. I didn't really cover the whole cloud template part of it, and I may or may not cover that in a later video, but again, I'm sure once I get more experience, I might want to redo this video and simplify things, but I'm using Debian 12, but I wanted to cover everything so it could be easily interpolated into another distribution, say Arch. And I'm going to probably want to look at some things in Arch too, because from the tutorials and the other stuff I've read, this didn't behave quite the way I was it didn't behave quite the way I was expecting it to behave. So there's some interesting things for me to look into and think about. Hope you enjoyed this. Please like, please subscribe, and if you're feeling up to it, please comment. And we'll see you all again next time. Thanks for joining us. Or joining me, anyways.